Hello and welcome. In this video, I will attempt to motivate you through a sample use case and give you a glimpse of what is possible in Excel. We will solve this problem in a structured manner, starting from stating the problem, understanding the data, uh, breaking the problem into small problems so that we can understand what the overall goal is. Okay, so let's start. So this is the raw data that we have. Raw data is also called source data, and we have 8 columns in this data, and we have 1084 rows. The first column is category and subcategory. So if you look closely, we have category as vegetables and then subcategory as veg juice. For some of them, the subcategory is not available, and we will see how to handle this kind of data. The second one is food name, which is the name of the actual food item. And then we have the measure, which is the quantity of the food item. And then we have weight, calories, protein, carbohydrate, and total fat of this food item. You would notice that we have TR in some of the values, which is short for trace, which means that in this particular item, we have the total fat as trace, which is like very low um, amount of fat. Now let's look at the problem statement that we have. So we have three questions that we need to answer today. What unique categories do we have? So if you go to the raw data, you would see that we have to answer how many unique categories that we have, which is the first part of this column. Then we need to know for each of these categories how many subcategories are available. So which will be the count of total subcategories that we have. And then which item has the most calories to weight ratio. So this is a problem of metric calculation, which basically means that this ratio is actually a metric or a KPI, key performance indicator, which will help us understand which food has the highest calorie per gram or per unit measure of weight. So now to start, we do not touch the raw data at all. We basically keep a backup of this data so that if we do any kind of errors or we face any kind of issues, we can come back to the data and we find it as is. So what we do is we make a copy of the data, which is in the refined data, and we only take the data that we actually need, and we drop anything which we actually do not require. So if I go to refined data, you would see that I have dropped food item column and total fat column and all the proteins and the carbohydrate column, because I would need category, subcategory, measure, weight, and calories only in order to answer the three questions that I have. Okay, so let's look at the question number one. What unique categories do we have? So if I go to refine data, like I told you, we have categories and subcategories in the first column. However, in order to calculate the unique number of categories that we have to basically split this column into two parts. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll copy this and go to my working sheet where I'll try and do the formulas or whatever steps I will take in order to clean the data or manipulate the data. So if I go into the data tab and do text to columns, I have the delimited option. Don't worry if you don't understand what I'm exactly doing, because this is just an example for now. We will go in depth into each of these steps later on. Instead of tab, I'll use the other one, which is this hyphen uh, as the delimiter, because the data is delimited by a hyphen. And then if I go next, I want to keep this in the general format and finish. So now you would see that we have the categories split. Okay. But one thing to notice is that after each category, we have a space which we actually do not need. And the same thing is before the subcategories. The reason it happened is because when I split the column, I used a hyphen. but before and after the hyphen, I had a space. That's why the category has an extra space after the word and subcategory has a space before the word. So in order to keep it clean, I'll use a trim function, which will basically remove all these spaces before and after any word. So now this formula uh, is applied here for these two values A2 and B2. I can basically click on this plus sign here and apply this formula for the entire column. However, we have one problem that we still haven't solved, which is in subcategories. If you look closely, you would see that there are some blank values. And because of these blank values, we will not know the actual number of subcategories that we have. Now, this is actually a business problem. So that means the business will have to take care of what needs to be filled in this blank, or do these blank will need to remain as blank values, right? For us, I simply say that any blank subcategory is actually equal to category. So I can simply use the formula here as is and apply this formula to all the other values. Now we have complete formulas without any blanks. Just to make sure that this is actually correct, we look at the entire list without the blanks, and same thing we do for the subcategories. Okay, so now in the working sheet we have the two cleaned category and subcategories column that we can actually insert into refined data sheet. So let me insert two columns here, go in the working sheet and copy this entire data, go back to refine sheet and simply paste the values. And I can rename the column to category and subcategory. At this point, I do not need this column, so I can remove it. And also, if you would notice that I actually do not need the measure column as well. So I can remove this column by selecting it. Let me reorganize the column width. Okay, so now we have 4 columns, which is the final data that we actually need in order to solve all the problems that we have. So let's take this entire data set and basically paste this in the working sheet. And now we can start creating formulas or creating pivot tables within the working sheet so that we understand how to get the final data that we need or the final answers that we need for the problem. Okay, now we only need one extra information in order to solve the entire 3 problem statements that we have, and that is the metric or the ratio, right? So if you go back to the problem statement, it says calories to weight ratio. So that means if I take calories and divide it by weight, we will get the final column that we are actually looking in order to get the um, result that we need. So let's go back to the working sheet and we say calories divide by weight. Now we basically drag and drop this column and we will have the ratio that we are looking for. Just for readability, I can basically do it like this so that we have only 2 numbers after the decimal. You would notice that there were uh, errors also. We are not going to handle the errors right now, but suffice it to say that we have an entire section devoted to errors and error handling, right? So now we have category, subcategory, and the ratio. Now, in order to solve the problem, I'll be using pivot tables, right? So what I can do is I can go to the insert tab and enter the pivot in the existing sheet so that you can see the pivot as well as the data together, right? Now, if I take the category in the rows, you would see that you will get a unique list of categories, right? And then I can put the subcategory in just below the category level. And now you would see that for the beverages, I have these many subcategories, right? For readability, I can basically redesign this to have a different layout, remove the subtotals, and now you would clearly see that eggs has only eggs, fast food has 6 different subcategories, right? Now, uh, the actual question was to get the count of subcategories. Consider this as your first homework where you would find the solution to the second problem on your own. How would you get the actual count of unique subcategories per category, right? Now for the third and final question, the maximum ratio, I can go directly to the table and do sorting of descending order. And what I'll see is that obviously we already covered this, that we are not going to take care of the errors for now. So let's ignore these errors. And what we will look at is in this data, it's not generalized, but in this data, fish has the highest ratio of calories to weight. That means per weight, per unit gram of weight, fish has the highest number of calories according to this data. So now that we have everything in the working sheet that we need to answer uh, the problem statements, we can go to the final result and basically structure the final outcomes in a way that will make sense to anyone as an audience. We can go ahead, for example, if this problem statement has been given to you by a manager, he will not be going to the working sheet and going through what you have done. He will need a final result sheet that can answer the questions immediately without the need of going through the process or the raw data, right? So, for example, I can have the unique list here, the maximum ratio here, and then count of each of the subcategories here, right? It's rather boring design, however, it makes sense to the problems that we have. I hope this sample example helped you understand a part of what we will be able to do after we complete the course. In the upcoming videos, you will go through some of the basic stuff that will help you get more and more familiar with Excel. Thank you.